Chapter 3. The Mystification of Experience. It is not enough to destroy one's own and other people's experience. One must overlay this devastation by a false consciousness, inured, as Marcuse puts it, to its own falsity. Exploitation must not be seen as such. It must be seen as benevolence. Persecution, preferably, should not need to be invalidated as the figment of a paranoid imagination. It should be experienced as kindness. Marx described mystification and showed its function in his day. Orwell's time is already with us. The colonists not only mystify the natives in the ways that Fanon so clearly shows, they have to mystify themselves. We in Europe and North America are the colonists, and in order to sustain our amazing images of ourselves as God's gift to the vast majority of the starving human species, we have to interiorize our violence upon ourselves and our children, and to employ the rhetoric of morality to describe this process. In order to rationalize our industrial military complex, we have to destroy our capacity both to see clearly any more what is in front of and to imagine what is beyond our noses. Long before a thermonuclear war can come about, we have had to lay waste our own sanity. We begin with the children. It is imperative to catch them in time. Without the most thorough and rapid brainwashing, their dirty minds would see through our dirty tricks. Children are not yet fools, but we shall turn them into imbeciles like ourselves, with high IQs, if possible. From the moment of birth, when the Stone Age baby confronts the 20th century mother, the baby is subjected to these forces of violence, called love, as its mother and father have been, and their parents before them. These forces are mainly concerned with destroying most of its potentialities. This enterprise is on the whole successful. By the time the new human being is 15 or so, we are left with a being like ourselves, a half-crazed creature more or less adjusted to a mad world. This is normality in our present age. Love and violence, properly speaking, are polar opposites. Love lets the other be, but with affection and concern. Violence attempts to constrain the other's freedom, to force him to act in the way we desire, but with ultimate lack of concern, with indifference to the other's own existence of destiny. We are effectively destroying ourselves by violence masquerading as love. I am a specialist, God help me, in events in inner space and time, in experiences called thoughts, images, reveries, memories, dreams, visions, hallucinations, dreams of memories, memories of dreams, memories of visions, dreams of hallucinations, refractions of refractions of refractions, of that original alpha and omega of experience and reality, that reality on whose repression, denial, splitting, projection, falsification, and general desecration and profanation our civilization, as much as on anything, is based. We live equally out of our bodies and out of our minds. Concerned as I am with this inner world, observing day in and day out its devastation, I ask why this has happened. One component of an answer suggested in Chapter 1 is that we can act on our experience of ourselves, others, and the world, as well as take action on the world through behavior itself. Specifically, this devastation is largely the work of violence that has been perpetrated on each of us and by each of us on ourselves. The usual name that much of this violence goes under is love. We act on our experience at the behest of the others, just as we learn how to behave in compliance to them. We are taught what to experience and what not to experience, as we are taught what movements to make and what sounds to emit. A child of 2 is already a moral mover, and moral talker, and moral experiencer. He already moves the right way, makes the right noises, and knows what he should feel and what he should not feel. His movements have become stereometric types, enabling the specialist anthropologist to identify, through his rhythm and style, his national even his regional characteristics. As he is taught to move in specific ways, out of the whole range of possible movements, so he is taught to experience out of the whole range of possible experience. Much current social science deepens the mystification. Violence cannot be seen through the sights of positivism. A woman grinds stuff down a goose's neck through a funnel. Is this a description of cruelty to an animal? She disclaims any motivation or intention of cruelty. If we were to describe the scene objectively, we would only be denuding it of what is objectively, or better, ontologically present in the situation. Every description presupposes our ontological premises as to the nature, being, of man, of animals, and of the relationship between them. If an animal is debased to a manufactured piece of produce, a sort of biochemical complex, so that its flesh and organs are simply material that has a certain texture in the mouth, soft, tender, rough, a taste, perhaps a smell, then to describe the animal positively in those terms is to debase oneself by debasing being itself. A positive description is not neutral or objective. In the case of geese as raw material for pâté, one can only give a negative description if the description is to remain underpinned by a valid ontology. That is to say, the description moves in the light of what this activity is a brutalization of, a debasement of, a desecration of, namely the true nature of human beings and of animals. The description must be in the light of the fact that the human beings have become so self-brutalized, banalized, stultified, that they are unaware of their own debasement. This is not to superimpose onto the neutral description certain value judgments that have lost all criterion of objective validity. That is to say, any validity that anyone feels needs to be taken really seriously. On subjective matters, anything goes. Political ideologies, on the other hand, are riddled with value judgments, unrecognized as such, that have no ontological validity. Pedants teach youth that such questions of value are unanswerable, or untestable, or unverifiable, or not really questions at all, or that what we require are meta-questions. Meanwhile, Vietnam goes on. Under the sign of alienation, every single aspect of the human reality is subject to falsification, and a positive description can only perpetuate the alienation which it cannot itself describe, and succeeds only in further deepening it, because it disguises and masks it the more. We must then repudiate a positivism that achieves its reliability by a successful masking of what is and what is not, by a serialization of the world of the observer, by turning the truly given into capta, which are taken as given, by the denuding of the world of being and relegating the ghost of being to a shadowland of subjective values. The theoretical and descriptive idiom of much research in social science adopts a stance of apparent objective neutrality, but we have seen how deceptive this can be. The choice of syntax and vocabulary are political acts that define and circumscribe the manner in which facts are to be experienced. Indeed, in a sense, they go further and even create the facts that are studied. The data given of research are not so much given as taken out of a constantly elusive matrix of happenings. We should speak of capta rather than data. The quantitatively interchangeable grist that goes into the mills of reliable studies and rating scales is the expression of a processing that we do on reality, which is not the expression of the processes of reality. Natural scientific investigations are conducted on objects or things, or the patterns of relations between things, or on systems of events. Persons are distinguished from things in that persons experience the world, whereas things behave in the world. Thing events do not experience. Personal events are experiential. Natural scientism is the error of turning persons into things by a process of reification that is not itself part of the true natural scientific method. Results derived in this way have to be dequantified and de-reified before they can be reassimilated into the realm of human discourse. The error, fundamentally, is the failure to realize that there is an ontological discontinuity between human beings and it beings. Human beings relate to each other not simply externally, like two billiard balls, but by the relations of the two worlds of experience that come into play when two people meet. If human beings are not studied as human beings, then this once more is violence and mystification. In much contemporary writing on the individual and the family, there is the assumption that there is some not too unhappy confluence, not to say pre-established harmony, between nature and nurture. There may be some adjustments to be made on both sides, but all things work together for good to those who want only security and identity. Gone is any sense of possible tragedy, of passion. Gone is any language of joy, delight, passion, sex, violence. The language is that of a boardroom. No more primal scenes, but parental coalitions. No more repression of sexual ties to parents, but the child rescinds its Oedipal wishes. For instance, the mother can properly invest her energies in the care of the young child when economic support, status, and protection of the family are provided by the father. She can also better limit her cathexis of the child to maternal feelings when her wifely needs are satisfied by her husband. T. Lidz, The Family and Human Adaptation. Here is no nasty talk of sexual intercourse or even primal scene. The economic metaphor is aptly employed. The mother invests in her child. What is most revealing is the husband's function, the provision of economic support, status, and protection, in that order. There is frequently reference to security, the esteem of others. What one is supposed to want, to live for, is gaining pleasure from the esteem and affection of others. If not, one is a psychopath. Such statements are, in a sense, true. They describe the frightened, cowed, abject creature that we are, admonished to be, if we are to be normal, offering each other mutual protection from our own violence. The family as a protection racket. Behind this language lurks the terror that is behind all this mutual back-scratching, this esteem, status, support, protection, security, giving and getting. Through its bland urbanity, the cracks still show. In our world, we are victims burning at the stake, signaling through the flames, but to Lidz et al., things go blandly on. Contemporary life requires adaptability. We require also to utilize intellect, and we require an emotional equilibrium that permits a person to be malleable, to adjust himself to others without fear of loss of identity with change. It requires a basic trust in others and a confidence in the integrity of the self. Sometimes there is a glimpse of more honesty. For instance, when we consider society rather than the individual, each society has a vital interest in the indoctrination of the infants who form its new recruits. What these authors say may be written ironically, but there is no evidence that it is. Adaptation to what? To society? To a world gone mad? The family's function is to repress eros, to induce a false consciousness of security, to deny death by avoiding life, to cut off transcendence, to believe in God, not to experience the void, to create, in short, one-dimensional man, to promote respect, conformity, obedience, to con children out of play, to induce a fear of failure, to promote a respect for work, to promote a respect for respectability. Let me present here two alternative views of the family and human adaptation. Men do not become what by nature they are meant to be, but what society makes them. Generous feelings are, as it were, shrunk up, seared, violently wrenched, and amputated to fit us for our intercourse with the world, something in the manner that beggars maim and mutilate their children to make them fit for their future situation in life. E. Colby, The Life of Thomas Holcroft, continued by William Hazlitt. And, in fact, the world still seems to be inhabited by savages, stupid enough to see reincarnated ancestors in their newborn children. Weapons and jewelry belonging to the dead man are waved under the infant's nose. If he makes a movement, there is a great shout. Grandfather has come back to life. This old man will suckle, dirty as straw, and bear the ancestral name. Survivors of his ancient generation will enjoy seeing their comrade of hunts and battles wave his tiny limbs and bawl. As soon as he can speak, they will inculcate recollections of the deceased. A severe training will restore his former character. They will remind him that he was wrathful, cruel, or magnanimous, and he will be convinced of it, despite all experience to the contrary. What barbarism! Take a living child, sew him up in a dead man's skin, and he will stifle in such senile childhood, with no occupation save to reproduce the avuncular gestures, with no hope save to poison future childhoods after his own death. No wonder, after that, if he speaks of himself with the greatest precautions, half under his breath, often in the third person. This miserable creature is well aware that he is his own grandfather. These backward aborigines can be found in the Fiji Islands, in Tahiti, in New Guinea, in Vienna, in Paris, in Rome, in New York, wherever there are men. They are called parents. Long before our birth, even before we are conceived, our parents have decided who we will be. Jean-Paul Sartre, forward to The Traitor by André Gorz. In some quarters there is a point of view that science is neutral, and that all this is a matter of value judgments. Lidz calls schizophrenia a failure of human adaptation. In that case, this too is a value judgment. Or is anyone going to say that this is an objective fact? Very well. Let us call schizophrenia a successful attempt not to adapt to pseudo-social realities. Is this also an objective fact? Schizophrenia is a failure of ego functioning. Is this a neutralist definition? But what is, or who is, the ego? In order to get back to what the ego is, to what actual reality it most nearly relates to, we have to desegregate it, depersonalize it, de-extrapolate, de-abstract, de-objectify, de-reify. And we get back to you and me, to our particular idioms or styles of relating to each other in social context. The ego is by definition an instrument of adaptation, so we are back to all the questions this apparent neutralism is begging. Schizophrenia is a successful avoidance of ego-type adaptation. Schizophrenia is labeled affixed by some people to others in situations where an interpersonal disjunction of a particular kind is occurring. This is the nearest one can get at the moment to something like an objective statement, so called. The family is, in the first place, the usual instrument for what is called socialization. That is, getting each new recruit to the human race to behave and experience in substantially the same way as those who have already got here. We are all fallen sons of prophecy, who have learned to die in the spirit and be reborn in the flesh. This is known also as selling one's birthright for a mess of pottage. Here are some examples from Jules Henry, an American professor of anthropology and sociology, in his study of the American school system. The observer is just entering her 5th grade classroom for the observation period. The teacher says, "Which one of you nice, polite boys would like to take the observer's coat and hang it up?" From the waving hands, it would seem that all would like to claim the honor. The teacher chooses one child, who takes the observer's coat. The teacher conducted the arithmetic lessons mostly by asking who would like to tell the answer to the next problem. This question was followed by the usual large and agitated forest of hands, with apparently much competition to answer. What strikes us here are the precision with which the teacher was able to mobilize the potentialities of the boys for the proper social behavior, and the speed with which they responded. The large number of waving hands proves that most of the boys have already become absurd, but they have no choice. Suppose they sat there frozen. A skilled teacher sets up many situations in such a way that a negative attitude can be construed only as treason. The function of questions like, "Which one of you nice, polite boys would like to take the observer's coat and hang it up?" is to blind the children into absurdity, to compel them to acknowledge that absurdity is existence, to acknowledge that it is better to exist absurd than not to exist at all. The reader will have observed that the question is not put, who has the answer to the next problem, but who would like to tell it. What at one time in our culture was phrased as a challenge in skill, in arithmetic, becomes an invitation to group participation. The essential issue is that nothing is but what it is made to be by the alchemy of the system. In a society where competition for the basic cultural goods is a pivot of action, people cannot be taught to love one another. It thus becomes necessary for the school to teach children how to hate, and without appearing to do so, for our culture cannot tolerate the idea that babes should hate each other. How does the school accomplish this ambiguity? Jules Henry, Culture Against Man. Here is another example given by Henry. Boris had trouble reducing 12/16 to the lowest terms and could only get as far as 6/8. The teacher asked him quietly if that was as far as he could reduce it. She suggested he think, much heaving up and down and waving of hands by the other children, all frantic to correct him. Boris pretty unhappy, probably mentally paralyzed. The teacher, quiet, patient, ignores the others and concentrates with look and voice on Boris. After a minute or two, she turns to the class and says, "Well, who can tell Boris what the number is?" A forest of hands appears, and the teacher calls Peggy. Peggy says that 4 may be divided into the numerator and the denominator. Henry comments, Boris's failure made it possible for Peggy to succeed. His misery is the occasion of her rejoicing. This is a standard condition of the contemporary American elementary school. To a Zuni, Hopi, or Dakota Indian, Peggy's performance would seem cruel beyond belief. For competition, the wringing of success from somebody's failure is a form of torture foreign to those non-competitive cultures. Looked at from Boris's point of view, the nightmare at the blackboard was perhaps a lesson in controlling himself so that he would not fly shrieking from the room under enormous public pressure. Such experiences force every man reared in our culture over and over again, night in, night out, even at the pinnacle of success, to dream not of success, but of failure. In school, the external nightmare is internalized for life. Boris was not learning arithmetic only, he was learning the essential nightmare also. To be successful in our culture, one must learn to dream of failure. End quote. It is Henry's contention that education in practice has never been an instrument to free the mind and the spirit of man, but to bind them. We think we want creative children, but what do we want them to create? If all through school the young were provoked to question the 10 Commandments, the sanctity of revealed religion, the foundations of patriotism, the profit motive, the two-party system, monogamy, the laws of incest, and so on, there would be such creativity that society would not know where to turn. Children do not give up their innate imagination, curiosity, dreaminess easily. You have to love them to get them to do that. Love is the path through permissiveness to discipline, and through discipline, only too often, to betrayal of self. What school must do is to induce children to want to think the way school wants them to think. What we see in the American kindergarten and early schooling process, says Henry, is the pathetic surrender of babies. You will, I trust, recognize the principles, whether they are applied later or sooner, in the school or in the home. It is the most difficult thing in the world to see this sort of thing in our own culture. In a London class, average age 10, the girls were given a competition. They had to bake cakes, and the boys were to judge them. One girl won. Then her friend let out that she had bought her cake instead of baking it herself. She was disgraced in front of the whole class. Comments. 1. The school is here inducting children into sex-linked roles of a very specific kind. 2. Personally, I find it obscene that girls should be taught that their status depends on the taste they can produce in boys' mouths. 3. Ethical values are brought into play in a situation that is at best a bad joke. If one is coerced into such game playing by adults, the best a child can do is to play the system without getting caught. I most admire the girl who won, and hope she will choose her friends more carefully in future. What Henry describes in American schools is a strategy that I have observed frequently in British families, studied by my colleagues and myself. The double action of destroying ourselves with one hand and calling this love with the other is a sleight of hand one can marvel at. Human beings seem to have an almost unlimited capacity to deceive themselves, and to deceive themselves into taking their own lies for truth. By such mystification, we achieve and sustain our adjustment, adaptation, socialization. But the result of such adjustment to our society is that, having been tricked and having tricked ourselves out of our minds, that is to say, out of our own personal world of experience, out of that unique meaning with which potentially we may endow the external world, simultaneously, we have been conned into the illusion that we are separate, skin-encapsulated egos. Having at one and the same time lost ourselves and developed the illusion that we are autonomous egos, we are expected to comply by inner consent with external constraints to an almost unbelievable extent. We do not live in a world of unambiguous identities and definitions, needs and fears, hopes, disillusions. The tremendous social realities of our time are ghosts, spectres of the murdered gods, and our own humanity returned to haunt and destroy us. The Negroes, the Jews, the Reds, them. Only you and me dressed differently. The texture of the fabric of these socially shared hallucinations is what we call reality, and our collusive madness is what we call sanity. Let no one suppose that this madness exists only somewhere in the night or day sky where our birds of death hover in the stratosphere. It exists in the interstices of our most intimate and personal moments. We have all been processed on Procrustean beds. At least some of us have managed to hate what they have made of us. Inevitably, we see the other as the reflection of the occasion of our own self-division. The others have become installed in our hearts, and we call them ourselves. Each person not being himself either to himself or the other, just as the other is not himself, to himself, or to us, in being another, for another, neither recognizes himself in the other, nor the other in himself. Hence being at least a double absence, haunted by the ghost of his own murdered self. No wonder modern man is addicted to other persons, and the more addicted, the less satisfied, the more lonely. Once more, there is a further turn of the spiral, another round of the vicious circle, another twist of the tourniquet. For now love becomes a further alienation, a further act of violence. My need is a need to be needed, my longing a longing to be longed for. I act now to install what I take to be myself in what I take to be the other person's heart. Marcel Proust wrote, "How have we the courage to wish to live? How can we make a movement to preserve ourselves from death, in a world where love is provoked by a lie and consists solely in the need of having our sufferings appeased by whatever being has made us suffer?" But no one makes us suffer. The violence we perpetrate and have done to us, the recriminations, reconciliations, the ecstasies, and the agonies of a love affair are based on the socially conditioned illusion that two actual persons are in a relationship. Under the circumstances, this is a dangerous state of hallucination and delusion, a mishmash of fantasy, exploding and imploding, of broken hearts, reparation, and revenge. Yet, within all this, I do not preclude the occasions when, most lost, lovers may discover each other, moments when recognition does occur, when hell can turn to heaven and come down to earth, when this crazy distraction can become joy and celebration. And at the very least, it befits babes in the wood to be kinder to each other, to show some sympathy and compassion, if there is any pathos and passion left to spend. But when violence masquerades as love, once the fissure into self and ego, inner and outer, good and bad occurs, all else is an infernal dance of false dualities. It has always been recognized that if you split being down the middle, if you insist on grabbing this without that, if you cling to the good without the bad, denying the one for the other, what happens is that the disassociated evil impulse, now evil in a double sense, returns to permeate and possess the good and turn it into itself. When the great Tao is lost, spring forth benevolence and righteousness. When wisdom and sagacity arise, there are great Hippocrates. When family relations are no longer harmonious, we have filial children and devoted parents. When a nation is in confusion and disorder, patriots are recognized. We must be very careful of our selective blindness. The Germans reared children to regard it as their duty to exterminate the Jews, adore their leader, to kill and die for the fatherland. The majority of my own generation did not or do not regard it as stark raving mad to feel it better to be dead than red. None of us, I take it, has lost too many hours' sleep over the threat of imminent annihilation of the human race and our own responsibility for this state of affairs. In the last 50 years, we human beings have slaughtered by our own hands coming on for 100 million of our species. We all live under constant threat of our total annihilation. We seem to seek death and destruction as much as life and happiness. We are as driven to kill and be killed as we are to let live and live. Only by the most outrageous violation of ourselves have we achieved our capacity to live in relative adjustment to a civilization apparently driven to its own destruction. Perhaps to a limited extent we can undo what has been done to us and what we have done to ourselves. Perhaps men and women were born to love one another, simply and genuinely, rather than to this travesty that we can call love. If we can stop destroying ourselves, we may stop destroying others. We have to begin by admitting and even accepting our violence, rather than blindly destroying ourselves with it. And therewith we have to realize that we are as deeply afraid to live and to love as we are to die.